Hello friends, and welcome back to my channel. I'm glad you're here. This week I read two difficult books and I was very pleased with myself, and it gave me a lot of pleasure until I thought, what were these really difficult books, or were they just difficult for me? I think a difficult book is different for every person. So what are the two difficult books that I finished? First, it's Margaret Lawrence's The Diviners, a Canadian family saga, an epic novel. And this is why it was difficult for me, partly. I can't talk about it too much because this was a buddy read with Lindy from Lindy's Magpie Reads and Sarah at Sarah Wallace at Roadworthy, and we haven't talked about the final chapter yet. But I'll just say that this is Canadian literature, which is new to me. I'm enjoying it. But also the fact that it's a family saga and an epic novel. It says that it's a powerful story of an independent woman who refuses to abandon her search for love. That's not really what it's about, and I really dislike that they said that, because it's so much more than that. It goes through a woman's life from the time has a tough childhood, very tough, in a very poor setting, into she comes into her own. And yes, there's love involved, there's life involved. But would this be a difficult book for everyone? I'm not sure, and I don't think so. So it made me think of what makes difficult books. The second book that I finished, that I'm sure wouldn't be difficult for a lot of people, and wasn't really difficult for me, but I think it would be difficult for other people, and that's Inspector Imanishi Investigates by Seicho Matsumoto. Let me tell you why that this would be a difficult book. It was a little difficult for me, and I lived in Japan for 3 years, and I knew a lot of the cultural references. However, this is a translated Japanese novel, was meant for Japanese audiences. And because of the mystery, and I talked about this mystery before, it's a man who's discovered basically in the train tracks, and he was murdered in Japan, of course, in Tokyo. And Inspector Imanishi is a wonderful character. He's like a Poirot, and he's really like a Poirot. And if you like Poirot, you're going to like the way he operates. He's a good husband, but you have to understand that this was written, the setting is in the late 1950s in Japan, not in Western country. So what you might feel that he's a good husband, you might feel he's not a good husband, but you feel his caring about other people, his sensitivity. He writes haiku poetry, and there's a lot of that in this book when he meets another character who also writes poetry. But what makes this book difficult, and even the translator, who in this book is Beth Carey, had to say, and first of all, this book was written in it was written in the 60s in Japan, in 1961, and the setting is around that time, maybe 1959, and the translation was 1989. And the translator said that you have to understand, well, she didn't say it that way, but she said somewhere that the family names in Japan come before the first names. So that might make it difficult for some people, because if, in other words, Imanishi-san would be his last name, but I think his name was Iro, his first name. So san is a honorific. So there are so many characters in this book that have a lot of names, Japanese names, that you might not be familiar with, and you might have to go back and say, okay, who are they talking about now? And realize that, where's his first name? And so that's would be a problem. That would make it difficult. Another thing is that he goes all over Japan and talks about a lot of topics that might not be familiar to a Western audience, like dialects from different areas of Japan. And one thing he said was, when he went to a place that I was in, was Osaka, he said, oh, the Osaka dialect is grating on my ears, which made me kind of giggle, because I lived in the Kansai area, which is Osaka, Kyoto, Nara, and Kobe, and I actually lived in Kobe for a long time. But anyway, this might be difficult, similar to what maybe a Western person would find in reading about like War and Peace, where they're talking about names that are Russian names, which are also hard for Western ears to remember and to understand, and maybe it's good to learn a little bit about it before you start. So, despite what I said about being difficult, this was such a satisfying mystery that I recommend it. And I also recommend The Diviners, which is Margaret Lawrence's last book about the Manawaka series, which is a place that she lived in Canada. So, in a prairie in Canada. So it has a lot of, if you don't know about living in prairies, which I should have, because I lived in Minnesota for 5 years. I went to college there. But still, it's a different country, and you still have to, there is some references that I didn't understand, and I was very lucky to be reading these two books with Lindy, who lives in Canada and who knows all about Canadian and other literature, a lot of literature. So before I start talking about the discussion that I want to do about what makes a book difficult, I just wanted to say that Point Zero, when it comes out, is an easier read for Westerners than Inspector Imanishi. However, I went to my library and I was lucky enough to find another book that Seicho Matsumoto wrote, and I want to read everything he wrote that's been translated. Of course, I can't read Japanese. Or kanji. So anyway, I told you I thought, after I was going to say, oh, it gave me a lot of pleasure reading a difficult book, and it made me think, what books that I've read that have been difficult for me and why? Now, a book that I read quite a while ago, and I'll try to have a copy over here, and it's Henry James' The Portrait of a Lady, and it's about a young woman. Her name almost came to me. That's how much this book really meant to me. But it's about a young woman who is brought up, and Henry James, I think the book was written in the late 1870s, and it's a book about a woman who's trying to be independent and not conform to to have a life, basically, and not have to conform to the mores of the time. And I remember there was parts of it that I found difficult for different reasons, but I was very satisfied at the ending of it. And I think, and I read this book before I joined Booktube. So I thought to myself, now the reason that I kept on with reading A Portrait of a Lady, even though it was difficult, was because it was a story of a woman, and I could understand the story of a woman because I'm a woman. But some books might be difficult. So I wrote down a few reasons why a book might be difficult. It might have long, maybe convoluted sentences, multiple clauses, It could be, and this is a difficult one for me, Stream of Consciousness, Virginia Woolf. I've tried to read Mrs. Dalloway a number of times and gave up because of that stream of consciousness. And I think I can still read it if I concentrate and make notes, but I guess I just felt it, at that time, it wasn't worth it. And this is what I brought up already, unfamiliar historical or cultural references. So if you're not familiar with any of the culture, you might not want to continue. It might feel boring to you. And I feel if a book is boring, just put it down. You might pick it up again. You know, there are ways of reading a difficult book that you want to read that might be boring, but if you maybe look at some guides to the book or read it on a different way, like on audio, it might be easier if you really want to take that second chance on it. For me, this is one of the most important, an absence of emotional connection. And if I can't feel an emotional connection to the book, usually I'm going to DNF it. I mean, that's been my pattern in my reading. I have to feel an emotional connection somehow, somewhere. And then I thought of a different one, and it has to do with two books that, in fact, one is a brand new release that I tried to read, and it's The Postcard by Anne Berest. And also, and these books I got in Canada, one for free, one is a new release, so not for free, $28.95 in Canadian, which is maybe less in US dollars. And the other one is I got for free because they didn't want to take my, well, the guy was nice, but he didn't want to take a credit card for $1 book. And I didn't have Canadian money, which I'm going to do the next time I go to Canada. And it's Ruta's Closet. And it says one of the finest Holocaust memoirs. And this is the reason. They're both dealing somehow with the Holocaust. And this is dealing with it in a French setting, and this is dealing with it in a Canadian setting. And difficult in a way that is going to make me emotionally distressed, which sometimes I feel I can handle and sometimes I feel I can't handle. So I went down a rabbit hole and thought about some books that might be difficult to other people and came across quite a few interesting and some very humorous things. So I want to know, tell me below, what are some difficult books that you have read? Now, some books came up pretty repetitively, and Albert Camus, James Joyce, William Faulkner, and The Sound of the Fury came up a few times. Many people said that it was worth a third read to really understand and that it was worth it. And I know that there is an event coming up with Faulkner, and I might be tempted to read it. Then I went down the rabbit hole, and these are just some humorous college students who had their own opinion that made me giggle, and I thought I would just say them here. You might not agree with them, but like I said, I don't know a lot of these authors. I'm not familiar with them. And one person said, Ulysses shouldn't exist. And I don't know. I know that some people are reading Ulysses or just finished Ulysses by James Joyce, and I'm sure they don't all feel that way, but this student did. And some other person with the same book said, I understand 2% of Ulysses by James Joyce. And this one made me laugh too. Finnegan's Wake feels like something written by an alien. And somebody said, anything by Albert Camus. And that one of these authors had the main character meet random people who go off on long monologues about who knows what. Anyway, I don't know if you feel that way about any of these books. What makes a difficult book worth reading? And I'm going to continue reading difficult books if I can feel a connection. And that's what makes a book, readable for me. Because, I don't want to read a book at this stage in my life that I'm not enjoying. And I think that's the main crux of what I'm trying to say, is that a book should be enjoyable, or else why read it? Of course, if you're in college, as I was when I was 38, I had to read books that were required reading, and I made a lot of annotations. And many times, and this is through high school, through college, I enjoyed that difficult book, and I was surprised I could enjoy a difficult book, a book that I would never have thought of reading. And since I joined BookTube, there have been so many different booktubers who give recommendations of books that I never would have thought that I had the capacity to understand, even though I'm a pretty good reader, or want to really get into a book like War and Peace, for example. I don't think I'm ever going to read War and Peace, though it's not considered a difficult book as much as it is a long book. I don't read, and I might lose some BookTube cred, that I don't read too much Dickens. And someone said that Dickens wrote by the word. He was paid by the word, so some of his books tend to be long-winded. I have read 2 books, The Christmas Carol and Oliver Twist, and I enjoyed both of those books, but I never really wanted to read more at this time in my life. Maybe I'll change. So let me know in the comments, what makes a book difficult for you, and what makes it worth reading? And of any of these books that I mentioned, can you recommend that I read it? That I take the plunge and really go into reading a difficult book? So I hope you enjoyed this discussion Friday Reads video, and let me know in the comments what you thought, and please like, comment, and subscribe. I really appreciate that. Until my next video, I hope you enjoyed my tree in the beginning of this video that's blooming. It's a 40-year-old tree that I planted with my last when my last son was born, and it's summer here, and the flowers it is a beautiful sight to see my 40-year-old tree that was planted as just a little, I was going to say seedling, but is it sapling? And now is so full of beautiful flowers and makes me so happy, as talking to you on BookTube does. So until we meet again, have a wonderful week, and I'll see you again in another video. Aloha!